Welcome back to another online lesson. If you remember from last time, we were talking about the causes of World War II. And at the end of that lesson, we were briefly talking about really what was America's position at the beginning of this war. So that's what we're going to start off our lesson with today. We're going to be looking at what were some of America's actions at the beginning of World War II when we were neutral. Again, notice that neutral is in quotation marks. And as you'll see, the U.S. wasn't entirely completely out of this war. They weren't entirely neutral. The first thing we're going to look at is the Neutrality Act of 1929, the Lend-Lease Act, and the Atlantic Charter. So let's get started. Moving down here, the Neutrality Act of 1939, basically that happened when war broke out in Europe. The U.S. said, you know what, we're going to stay out of it. We're going to stay neutral. However, President Roosevelt, FDR, he lobbies Congress to eliminate a ban on arms sales to nations at war. So what he's saying is a ban on arms sales really is basically we're saying if you're at war, we're not going to sell you any weapons. But he lobbies Congress to get rid of this law so that we can sell weapons to countries that are at war. And again, we're looking to bring ourselves out of the Great Depression. And as I said last unit, if it hadn't been for World War II, we probably wouldn't have gotten out of the Great Depression as quickly. This pulls us right out. So now warring nations could buy weapons from the United States if they paid in cash and carried arms on their own ships. So if they come, they pay in cash, not credit, they pay in cash, money up front, and they carry the arms or the weapons or whatever they take on their own ships, we will sell it to them. And one of the interesting things about this cartoon, it says, all and out aid to our allies. And that's the USS Neutrality Act right there. We are out of it, but we are going to give aid to our allies in exchange for money. Scrolling down, we'll look at the Lend-Lease Act. Now, this U.S. Act, the United States would lend or lease arms, so they would pay them off, and they were supposed to return them, and they'd keep paying like payments with them, to any country considered vital to the defense of the United States. So if we saw countries that, for instance, let's look at Great Britain, or also known as England, that we were friends with, we would help them out because they were vital to our defense, because they stood for the same things we stood for, and they were against the Germans. By the time Lend-Lease ended, the U.S. had contributed over $40 billion in weapons, vehicles, and other supplies to the Allied war effort. So you can see the U.S. is cashing in on this war in Europe. And I'm going to make this picture a little bit bigger here. Looking at it, it says it's truly encouraging how much of this stuff drifts into British ports. And here you've got the U.S. Lend-Lease Dunk Corporation, so they're dunking it in to Great Britain's ports, and it says 2/3 of the way till England. You've got a plane looking to pick that up. So again, the U.S. is helping out our allies. We aren't entirely neutral. And finally, Roosevelt and Churchill meet in 1941 in August off of Newfoundland, and they sign the Atlantic Charter. This commits the two countries to a post-war world of democracy, non-aggression, free trade, economic advancement, and the freedom of the seas. So again, this binds us with Europe. It's particularly Great Britain. It binds us with Great Britain. We are now closer allies. And because of all of these, the Lend-Lease, the Atlantic Charter, and the Neutrality Act, some countries take exception. They're upset that the U.S. is doing this and getting involved. So let's scroll down a little bit. The next thing we're going to look at is, why did Japan attack the United States? So that's an interesting thing. Some of you may be wondering, well, Japan attacked the United States? Why? So let's go ahead and move here. Until December 1941, the U.S. had little interest in entering another war. We were happy with selling our weapons to other countries at war and staying out of it. Isolationist ideas were still very popular, and we were struggling to dig ourselves out of the Great Depression. It was a slippery slope that we were beginning to climb. The U.S. stance of neutrality would come to an end, however, on December 7th, 1941. On December 7th, 1941, the United States was suddenly and deliberately attacked by the Empire of Japan. They attacked our naval base in Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, particularly the island of Oahu. Japan had their reasons. First, FDR had signed the Lend-Lease Act with the Allied powers. This stated that the U.S. would begin trading with allies during World War II. So again, we're not trading with everyone, we're just trading with our allies. We had cut off trade of both oil, and this is big, of both oil and steel to Japan. Without these resources, because Japan does not have many of these on their islands, they knew that war would be difficult to wage or to fight. And Japan hoped to carry a knockout blow to the United States and completely devastating our naval fleet. We were knocked down, we were not out. And finally, Pearl Harbor was geographically close to Japan. Very close, and it was easy for them to reach that area by plane. So, just going to quickly go back here. We just looked at why did Japan attack the United States? Now let's look at the U.S. entering the war. And here are the words of President Roosevelt. On December 7th, 1941, the United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by the Empire of Japan. We're going to look at what were the effects of this attack on Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. Why did the U.S. enter the war? On December 7th, 1941, and that's a date that will live in infamy. The United States, the naval base at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii, was attacked by Japanese planes. 3,000 plus sailors lose their lives in this sneak attack. It happened in the morning. They were not prepared. They had no warning of this coming threat. Dozens of U.S. ships and planes are destroyed in the attack, which lasts over an hour. And FDR immediately declares war on Japan. In his fireside speech, he declares December 7th a day that will live in infamy. So I'm going to highlight that there. So we talked about what happened to the United States. What were the effects? Now let's look at our road to war. And this will be the final part of this lesson. So going back to this page, scrolling down. The road to war. Following FDR's speech, the Senate voted 82-0, and the House voted 388-1 to declare war on Japan. Again, the president has no right to declare war on his own. He needs approval from Congress. Coming to Japan's defense, after we declare war on them, Germany declares war on us on December 11th, 1941. And that cements our involvement in this world struggle. So, very quickly, we've talked about what were some of America's actions at the beginning of World War II when we were supposedly neutral. Why did Japan attack the United States? The U.S. entering the war, including the attack on Pearl Harbor and our road to war. Next time when we come back, we will be looking at life on the home front. And what was it like for people who maybe weren't involved with the fighting, but they were involved in the war effort itself. See you next time.